Hello everyone, welcome to Project Likkutei Torah, Daf 63, Daf Samch Gimel, Parshas Chukas, and we are on the third ice of the Mimer Al-Beer. Now we know Vahine from this Be'er that we've been speaking about in the last two ices, through the digging, we're able to reach this revelation of this level of Chיים, which is, there's more קיום from this level of Ava Krish Be'esh, with Islavos in our Tefila, that through this bonus, etc., that we can reach these very high levels. And after the davening, after the Tefila, this is, his eros reverts back to normal, and the person is at the same state they were before. However, the level of Mayim represents the Hamshachas of Ahava that doesn't have any hefsek. This is the whole advantage of Avram Oivi. It says in Yeshaya that Avram is connected to the level of Ahava, Isha Chesed, Zachar Av, Nimshach Achrecha Kamayim. Now, because that they are Mayim Chיים, that they receive from Chachma, which is called Chיים, because Chachma says in Koheles, Chachma Tachaya, connecting Chachma to Chayim. That's another pasuk in Mishlei, Be'or Pnim Melech Chayim. This means this level of Bittul, corresponds to the level of Bittul. Chachma is connected to Bittul because Chachma is the Isis Koyach Ma. This Gilui in the soul of man is specifically through Asik B'Torah, specifically through learning Torah, because a Reitza Mechachma Nafkas, because the Torah is derived from Chachma, which is the level of Bittul, and therefore it's from it is Nimshach, this revelation in the soul of man, from this level of V'lai Sachalu, etc. Should not profane. Shaloi Lidchek Raglei Ashchina V'asim Devarei Beficha. And therefore, in the section of the Torah, starting with Kaddish Li, in the Parsha of Kaddish Li, which is one of the sections in our Tefillin, which is Chachmeilah, it says, Zikarin Beinenecha, we refer to the Tefillin as a remembrance to their eyes, meaning, what does that mean? That there's no hefsek for the love for Hashem, like the Be'er Mayim Chayim that flows constantly. Meaning that through that which is written afterwards and later on in the same Parsha, Laman Tihya Torah Savaya Beficha. It's all for the sake that the Torah of Hashem should be in your mouth. And similarly, is written in Sifri in the Parshas Veschanan, because it says in Parshas Veschanan, V'ahavta Eis Havaya, that you shall love Hashem in the Shema. The whole question is Be'ezit Sad Oivim Hakadosh Baruch Hu, with which side is loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The Talmud teaches us that these, specifically, how do we love HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Specifically through these words, the words of the Torah that we learn, we're able to show our love for Hashem. Meaning to say that because Chachma is the Torah, is the level of Re'iyah, and the love that's Nimshach from the level of Re'iyah is the level of Bittul, which is higher than the level of Ava, which is Nimshachas from the level of Shmiya, which is distant, and this level of Rish Be'esh, etc. And this Gilui from the level of Mayim Chayim of Torah is Nimshach from the well, this well that flows from under the earth, which is the level of mitzvahs that's enclosed in Yonim Gashmim, just like the water is enclosed in the earth, it's under the earth, so too the mitzvahs are enclosed in the physicality of the world. Because the whole Torah is an explanation of the mitzvahs. And from the well flows this Mayim Chayim, this living waters of the Torah to have this level of bittul. V'lo sachalu as shem kodshi. And v'asim dvari beficha. Shows the idea of bittul through Torah. And this it says in Zechariah, B'yamahu yetzu mayim chayim Yerushalayim chetziam aliyam hakadmoni, that this mayim chayim will reach Yerushalayim will leave from Yerushalayim to this primordial sea. Because mayim chayim of Torah is enclosed in Gashmius, which is drawn down from below to above, to this primordial Yama Kadmaini, this primordial sea. So this Yama Kadmaini, in this level of Makabal, to receive this level of Mayim Chaim Shalamato. And the Inyan is written, Az Nidbaru Chule V'Yakshev Havaya V'Yishma. This is a pasuk that is implying that men spoke, and because in their response, that Hashem took note and listened, and then He wrote down the Torah. But l'chara, that doesn't make sense with which we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu need to hear from people below in order to write the Torah, when we know that there's another pasuk that says Torah Chadash Mi'iti Tetzei, that the Torah is from Hashem. So the Indian is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is called sometimes this level of Malach Lamin, and the Torah of this world, that we know that the Torah of this world is because it is enclosed in Yanim Gashmim, that its source is very lofty, and therefore it shows in this Koyach V'chayis from the Ein Sof Baruch Hu, from above, from very high up, Maila, from the level of Seva Kalamim to the level of Mal Kalamim. And that's the idea of a Yakshev Havaya V'Yishma, that Hashem took note and heard. And this is the Inyan B'mchokek B'mishainusam, as it says in Parshas Chukas, in our Parsha, that just like is explained on the pasuk in Bechukoisai Teilecho, if you go in the ways of Mechukim, that these two chakikos into a vessel, there's two chakikos into the kli. By way of analogy, there's chakika from the outside and then from the inside. Mibachutz, from the outside, the idea of chakika from the outside is to remove any rust that might occur on the outside of the vessel. And the idea of chakika on the inside is to carve out that base kibble, that curvature, in order to make it a proper receptacle. Now, so similarly, we need to have this, just like physically, we need to have this chakika mibachut. So too, baruchnius in their nefesh, we have to have this chakika. So how do we have that? So mibayis, from the outside, having this chakika in our nefesh, is to remove anything that prevents us from serving Hashem. And that's the idea of chafira, digging. As we explained earlier, umibifnim, chakika mibifnim, is in order to have to create a kli kibul with it in our nefesh for the Ein Sof Baruch Hu to come in, just like we're making our neshama into a kli machzik bracha, chulei, and the Ein Sof only dwells and reveals itself in the level of chachma, and the mahokek is the one that makes the kli kibul is the one that's mamshech this level of Torah and the level of bittul chulei. B'mishanutam, this is tamchei oiraisa, meaning it refers to those that support the Torah, as it says in Mishlei, Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim ba. And like in the Indian, it says in Yisachar and Zvulun, with regards to Yisachar and Zvulun, that the sons of Yisachar, they were the Sanhedrin, they were the judges Zvulun, through being engaged in business activities, those for the sake of Yisachar. Therefore, they were able to merit and become elevated much higher level than they would be previously. Meaning that they'd be elevated from a level of mata l'mayla, from below to above, because it was thanks to the work that Zvulun did, the children of Zvulun did in their business activities, to draw down this goodness and chayas into the world, and made possible, making the kli for Yisachar to be Isaac in Torah with this chayas that was nimshach to him. Therefore, that's why Zvulun comes in the pasuk, comes before Yisachar. Zvulun Yisachar ba'alacha. That because the chayas is mamshach by Zvulun, and then that makes it possible for Yisachar to learn the Torah. And therefore, it says with regards to Zvulun, amim harikrau chulei, meaning to say that just like in the way that it says in Tehillim, that mi yale bahar Hashem and mi yakum chulei. However, with regards to Zvulun, even the level of amim, nations, which refers to aimimais, the embers, like glowing coals, ikro, they will gather to this level of har havaya. However, that all these levels we spoke about previously, that are in the level of be'er, of a level of a well, from below to above, needs to have this isusdil ela before the isusdil sata, the arousal from above before the arousal from below. And this the whole idea is az yishir Yisrael, that then the Jewish people will sing. This refers to Yisrael dila ela, ali ve'er, ascend a well. This is Knesset Yisrael, the source of the neshamas of the Jewish people, which gather in this level of Yisrael Dulaila. So, as issues Ali Ve'er Enula. So, what does Enula mean? This alludes to Milmailu Lamata, from below. This answering, the idea of answering, coming from above to below. You need to have this Dulaila before this Dul Sat, in order so that the Ali Be'er, which alludes to Matala Maila, as explained by our sages, Il Malay Kadosh Baruch Hu Oisachoi Chule. If only a Kadosh Baruch Hu would help him, etc. And this is why we request in our davening that we 3 times a day, V'achzireinu b'shuva shlema fanecha, Avrachman rachem na alein v'sim b'libinu bina. So as in the Berchas Krishma, that the idea is to understand something within something else. Havin davar mitoch davar. That's the mile of bina. That also the rachmanus, this great rachmanus that's upon us, is very distant from our hasaga, and we're not able to arouse this rachmanus as it is. And the Isus Dila comes through the Meshachas of the Torah, which is the idea of Chachma b'reish v'Chachma b'seif. Chachma at the beginning and Chachma at the end. Chachma b'reish, this is all based on the Zohar. Chachma b'reish alludes to the level of the Isus Dila before the Isus Dila Sata. And Chachma b'seif, the idea that through the Isus Dila Sata, we reach this Isudul Eila, which is the be'er, that is chafaruha, karuha, chule, b'mchokek, b'mishanesam, yitzu mayim chayim. Through that, we will have the living waters leave. That is the end of the body of the mimer. Now moving on to the beer of the mimer. Beer inyan ali be'er chule. On the base. Now, behold, is explained in Eitz Chaim, the beginning of Shar Man Umad, that my nukvin of nukva is nimshach in the womb of the mother from her brain. similar to the masculine waters nimshach from the man's brain, as is explained there, that feminine waters is from the 7 malchin de tohu, the 7, I guess, kings of tohu. That just like that they are, I guess, sunken in the klippas, and they're not refined yet. That through our davening and through our mitzvahs, we're able to refine and take these sparks from this state of concealment and elevate it to the level of מהנוקבין. That's what we're able to accomplish during our davening. And we find that the מהנוקבין, its source in the chachma of alamato, that the 7 malchin, these 7 kings, are from this level of moichin, which is a chachma, as is written in Eitz Chaim, Jershalef. That which is written is nimshach from, this is the parentheses that we're going to skip. Now, moving on after the parentheses, the level of chachma within tohu, there is a glimmer and a shine of keser within tohu. Meaning that chachma me'ayin timatze, chachma comes from the level of ayin, which is the level of keser, and then every place, this level of keser is that which unites the maitzil, ein seik baruch Hu, with the net salim, that the emanator with the emanations, that the beginning of the emanations starts with chachma. And also here, this level of beer of the 248 sparks of tohu is within noigas to elevate the level of מהנוקבין, that after the chachma of tohu is from מהנוקבין, from the feminine waters, if that's the case, that also this level of keser of tohu shines forth as level of chachma, that this level of keser of tohu is an intermediary, that through it is nimshach, this light that is within chachma of tohu, just like keser of tikkun is an intermediary, as a mamutza b'mkayimai is a intermediary in its place. Only that in tikkun we're able to create this level of partsufim. That in tohu, there's a level of nekudais, one underneath the other, etc. And the ha'ara is very lofty, even loftier than chachma bina of tikkun, because in tohu we have the earth's very large amounts of earth. This is the inyan of abאר חיים, of the well of living water, that this is the level of halas man, the nukva, of elevating the feminine waters of nukva. And this it says, Asilavo and Zachariah, says in Pasuk, V'haya b'yamahu yetzu mayim chayim Yerushalayim chetziam el hayam akadmoini, that this water will, this living, specifically the living waters, will exit from Yerushalayim, which alludes to Bina within Tikkun. Now the question of this, in the Zohar in Parshas Shlach, it says, Man chama chafira deveira, and on the side the Rav Chaim Vital writes, Be'er chafaruha, Ya'iv mayin lambuad dinavila, meaning who saw that digging a well would bring about the flowing of a spring. So this wellspring that the Zohar is referring to is Bina within Atzilus. In Bina Atzilus you have the ha'ara of Keser and also of Chachma. And the whole content of this answer is that because through the spring we ascend, that causes the feminine waters to ascend, that they are from Keser, the Keser Chachma Bina de Tohu, they are much loftier in their source than Keser Chachma Bina de Tikkun. In order to understand the explanations of these words of the Zohar and the answer, question answer, is that we know that it's written in Sefer Bahir that there are 10 spheres from above to below and from below to above. From Milamayla Lamata we knew. From below to above we did not know. They're the level of the 10 spheres of Or Yashar and the 10 spheres of Or Chayzer. And the 10 spheres of Or Chayzer, Malchus is Keser. And this is the whole inyan of Mayan Ganim, Be'er Mayim Chayim. This flow of gardens and the well of living waters. That the whole inyan of Mayan Ganim, this wellspring of gardens, is the idea of Bina Vatzilos. It's also called Yam HaKadmoini, the primordial sea that descends into Bria Tzira Yosia through his Labshus in Malchus of Atzilos. She becomes Atik of Bria. From this level of the Atik for Bria, from Bria, it's Nimshach, where the Neshamas are actually able to benefit from the Ziv of the Shechina and Gan Eden, because Ima Mekanadab Kersai, Ima referring to Bina. This is the inyan of the Mayan Hamashke Gan Eden Alyain, of the wellspring that irrigates the higher Gan Eden. And through this, the Mayan, this wellspring, goes and is drawn down further, that Malchus of Bria becomes Atik in the source that flows to Yetzirah, and Malchus of Yetzirah is the Atik, and Makar, meaning Primus Akesar, the source from which the wellspring flows to Asiyah, into Gan Eden Hatachtain, and the essence of this wellspring is Bina of Atzilus. As is explained in the Zayar, the end of Parshas Azino, that Mayan Ganim is the level of Nar Yetz Me'eden, that it's the level of the river that goes out from the Garden of Eden, Hashkais Sagan. That there is explained that the Gan is Shamayim. Esagan, the fact that it says Esagan, this comes to include Esa Aretz, meaning that because Shamayim and Aretz are called Gan Eden Elyon and Gan Eden Tachtein, as it is known from the inyan of Li Bashamayim V'im Choloi Chofatzti Ba'aretz. We know that, and this Shevach that the Mayan Ganim has on the Knesset Yisrael, it says that is Malchus of Atzilus. Even the Mayan is this level of Bina. However, in order to draw down to the Ganim, it's Davka through Malchus of Atzilus. It's Davka, this intermediary, that draws down the Ein Sof from Atzilus to Bria. That the Malchus of Atzilus becomes Keser to Bria. The Keser is an intermediary, and if that's the case, is the Iker of this level of Mayan Ganim, of this wellspring of gardens. And this is the whole inyan of Eser Spheres, Mil Maila Lamata, of the 10 spheres from above to below, that this Mayan, this wellspring, is Nimshach from Keser, Chachma, into Chachma and Bina, within Tikkun, that the Nahar that is Yetz Me'eden, the river that comes out from Eden, this is Chachma, that is Me'ayin Timatze. Chachma Me'ayin Timatze. Also, the revelation of Atik is in Bina, is Nimshach from Lamayla Lamata to this level of Malchus to Atzilus, which becomes Atik to Bria, which irrigates the Gan Eden Elyon and Tachtain Chule. Ki Chula Mashke Chule Began Kigan Havaye Chule. Now moving on to Sif Beis. Okay, now moving on to Is Beis. After discussing the inyan of mayim ganim and bear mayim chayim, we can understand it further in the context of or yashar and or chayzer. That mayim ganim is or yashar, which is the wellspring that is nimshach milmal lamata. Then afterwards, we have the idea of milmata lamayla, which is the esrespheres of or chayzer. That from the perspective of or chayzer, malchus is the ikr. That the level of keser of the esrespheres, that malchus is the keser of or chayzer canal, which is the inyan of bear mayim chayim. That the be'er flows water from below to above, as explained, as it is written in the Zohar. Furthermore, that the mayim, the wellspring, is nimshach, and is mashke me'elov, like the inyan v'nar yetz me'edin hashkois, that the water goes out from Eden to irrigate, etc. This is the inyan of Mshacha milmal lamata, which is not the case with regards to the be'er, the wellspring, which only occurs through chafira ucharia, which only occurs through digging the well, the actual effort of milmata lamala, of actually digging the well. That even though that the flow of water of the well occurs bidei shemayim, through the hands of heaven, that this is water that flows. However, nevertheless, it only comes through digging the dirt to reveal the water that flows in the well. Meaning that the well is this level of halas man de nukfa, that's elevating this feminine waters, which is the inyan of Isidol Sata. And the inyan, as it is written in Chaim, that this level of malchus, which is binyan kaimasa, was already completed its refinement, and already is in the level of tikkun. However, man de nukfa has yet to be completely refined, and that remains to be refined through our avodah, and through the chet of Adam Rishon. Even man de ima fell to the extent that we have to refine it. Now, this level of malchus is called mayan ganim, as we explained, which is the level of malchus in its own right, malchus ba'atzma. That malchus ba'atzma already has its birur completed. That in malchus ba'atzma, it's nimshach from keser chachma bina de tikkun to tzilos, which becomes atik to bria, to irrigate the ganim, chulei, etc. However, that which is called be'er mayim chayim, this comes from the elevation of man de nukva that occurs through our avodah. Just like the well that needs chafira, needs to be dug through our own avodah, needs to dug and penetrate the earth to reveal the water. And from man and mad, the feminine waters, the masculine waters, that's nimshach, through the man, that the feminine waters that creates and forms the child, that they are the neshamas, is the inyan of ad de mate raglin beraglin chulei. That in general, the feminine waters represents the form of man, the intellect and emotions, chachma b'nadas chesed gvur tiferes netzach hayden yesod. And in the times of the Tanaim and the Amarayim, they were able to refine, refined the Chabad and the Chagas, their intellect and their Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes. And now we refine the Netzach Had Yesod, because we are on the Ikvus de Meshicha. We are on the footsteps of the heels of Mashiach's coming. And this is that when the refinement, the beer is completed, it is written for Amdi Raglov in Zechariah, that the legs will stand. That this nevuah of Zechariah, that Hashem will place his feet over the Mount of Olives, specifically the fact that it's using the feet, alludes to the Ikvus Mashiach, that we are able to refine the lower aspect of the spheres. Now, it is explained in medical books that the main formation of the fetus in the womb initially comes from the egg, the seed of the woman, that comes out from the uterus of the woman, and the seed of the man, which would be the semen. This is the idea of, just like in the cheese making process, when the milk is set out to congeal and form curds, that just like it's written in Eoif, that kagvina takpieni, you curdled me like cheese, that just like in the cheese making process, the whole formation of the cheese comes from the milk, only that through specifically adding some enzyme and activating agent, traditionally from the lining of the intestines of an animal. It's called a mymid. This enzyme activates the cheese making process that causes the milk to curdle and form curds, which becomes cheese. So too, in the formation and creation of a child, the seed of the male is, so to speak, the enzyme, this mymid, so to speak, that goes into the seed of the woman, that makes it possible to curdle and form the cells and the multiplication of the cells in order, so that way the child will form. So too now we can understand the nimshal, the mila, with regards to the neshamas that were formed from mein nukvin and mein duchrin, that the main hishavos of the neshamas that are formed is from mein nukvin, the nukva, as it explains in Chaim over there, that the mein nukvin, the feminine waters, these are the holy neshamas, mamish, that were implanted, that were sunken within the klippas, and we are able to elevate them to the level of mein nukvin. However, nevertheless, specifically after we refine the mein nukvin through the mein duchrin, through the masculine waters, which refines the mein nukvin a second time, this is the level of Shema, which is chachma, the idea of refining chachma, which draws down to them this level of bittul, because shfir zekalim occurred because they had this level of yeshus. However, nevertheless, the main neshama comes to the level of mein nukvin, meaning to say that because there's this level of chachma and keser de toihu, which is higher than chachma and keser de tikun, which is the level of the mein duchrin, meaning to say that their source comes from Shem Sag, which is the mahus and atzmius of the iris that are in Ak, Adam Cahnman, and not the ha'ara ba'alma, like over there, ma Shmei Mitzchai, Ma that is within his forehead. And this is also that which it is written in Rai Mehemna in Parshas Tisa, Kisisa, Avna lemishkal ba da yud, meaning to say that the yud, the letter yud, is this level of chachma v'tzilus, which is the level of mein duchrin that refines the mein nukfin, just like a stone which the businessmen use to weigh, using these weights and measures that have these two sides to it to see how much product that they're selling weighs when it's sold by the pound, and by pressing down on with the stone, it lifts the other side up. Nevertheless, after refining the mein nukfin through the mein duchrin, then is even able to reach an even higher level, just like the mashal of the businessman that uses the stone to weigh the item, that by placing the stone it's able to lift the item. That the idea is that the effort that you're putting in to lift the item, the stone that is used, the weight is much less expensive than the actual item that's being sold. So that works well in the nimshal. And this is also the inyan of Ad David Higdil, as it's brought down in Shmuel. And Ishus Chayil tears Baila. Because mein nukfin source comes from Sag, which is higher than Ma. It's also understood this inyan by way that which is written in Sefer Bahir. The Shechina Lamata, just like the Shechina, it's just like the Shechina Lamala, which is an analogy to that. To what is it similar to? To a king that had 7 sons, and the Tachtoin said that I am Lamata, Ani Lamata la Yisrachik Mimcha. Meaning, meaning to say, it doesn't matter which of the 7 children is the lowest, so to speak, because the king was going around all of them and considered them all equal. So I think we're talking about the Shechina Lamata and Shechina Lamala being on the same level. Now the explanation is Harein Mesabe V'Eschem means that Hashem Yisbarech is Sev Klamim. It's the level of Igul Agadol Shilfnei Kav, this great circle that comes before the Kav, which surrounds and encompasses all the Olamis. And from the perspective of the Kav, it's Shaykh, this level of Ma'alamata, that the beginning of the Kav comes from Chachma, and there the main Gilui of a Kulam Chachma Sisa is Kulam Chachma Sisa. And all that which is Nimshach Lamata Yoser becomes more mitzamtzem and becomes more diminished. This revelation of light becomes more diminished, and the Malchus, which is this level, the last level of the Esher Spheres, this is what it means. That from the perspective of Or HaKav, it's more further distant, but from this perspective of Igul, or in other words, Saiv of Kalmin, that Malchus is not necessarily the lowest. Actually, it could be in the highest or anything in between from the perspective of Saiv of Kalmin. So the answer is Harein Mesabe V'Eschem. If that's the case, from the perspective of Saiv of Kalmin, the Igul Agadol that's Makif, the Kav, and all the Oilmis, the answer is Adrabah, that Malchus, that from the perspective of the Kav, it's at the end of the Kav, it's closer to the level, to this aspect of Igul Agadol, much more than the other 9 spheres in the middle of the Kav, by way of analogy. And even this level of Chachmei, which is the beginning of the Gilui, that from the outset, the Kav is Nimshach into the level of Keser. That's the case. The Keser makes a separation between the great eagle to the level of Chachma, by way of analogy. And that is not the case with regards to the aspect of Malchus, which is much closer to the lower end of the eagle without any hefsek between them. Now, this is similar to which that is explained in the Tanya, the 20th letter in Igersa Kodesh of Tanya, that starts with Ivachayahi, explains that this is only because the feet of Adam Cahnman culminate at the lowest level of Asiya, and below his feet, meaning below the lowest levels of Adam Cahnman, radiates the infinite Ein Sof light, which is self-calming, encircles all worlds, without any great interruption between them, except for the igulim of Adam Cahnman itself. That also the kav of the Ein Sof light, culminating at the end of the feet of Adam Cahnman, radiates from below upward in a mode of or chayzer, a reflected light. This is like the investment of the kav in Arach Anpin, Aben Ima, and Za, Nukva Vatzilus, which radiates as an or chayzer from Malchus Vatzilus. And through this is the koyach and strength to complete the kli within Malchus. You should look over there. Keser, as we mentioned earlier in the Tanya, for the beginning is wedged in the end. End of quotation. And through this, with regards to the idea of Birnitzaitzim Ditoyu, which is the level of my nukvin, which became distant and fell below into nega of Briyatir and Asiya, and like that which becomes refined from the klippas as included in Kedusha, it's illuminated in them the aura of self-calming with greater closeness. And this is the inyan of Yisrael Mas Bali Tshuva. This is the advantage of Bali Tshuva over Tzaddikim, because the level of Rachayik Shenes Karev becomes Karv Yeser from the light of Saiviv Kalmin, which illuminates in it to a greater extent in the level of Kiruv and Gilui. And through this, it's understood that the refinement of these Nitzaitzim, the Asiya has in them a greater advantage from this reason, the fact that from the refinement of the Birui, the Yitzira Ubriya, meaning there's an advantage of the Birui Nitzaitzim of Asiya over the Birui of Yitzira and Ubriya. And this is the inyan of Adamat Raglin Beraglin that we mentioned earlier. And the idea of Tachas Raglav Mir Chule. This is that which is written in Sefer Bayer, that Esher Spheres Mil Mile Mati Yadainu, because they're Hamshacha from the level of the Kav. Because their Hamshacha is from that level of Kav. However, Esher Spheres Mil Mati Yadainu, that inyan is because it's nimshach in them, the heart of Seif Kami, that there's no machshava that grasps Hashem at all. There's a level of makif gadol. There's no Maila Mata at all, which is there's Lamaila Midas Vasaga. And to this we can explain the Maimer verse sages on the pasuk Shemesh Yada Mavaye. The idea is Yereach Layada Mavaye. Meaning specifically the sun knows, but the moon does not know. Meaning that the level of Shemesh, sun, represents Or Yeshu, because the sun is a direct rays of light into the earth, from above to below, which is the idea of Yadainu. However, the level of Yereach, which is the moon, since it reflects from the sun, it descends to become the Reish Lashulim, the head of Fakas, to refine the sparks that fell in the world of Tov. And through this becomes this elevation of mind Nukfin, which is the level of Shalamayla Madas, the idea of being beyond knowledge and Hasaga, as we mentioned earlier. And this is what it means Lo Yada Mavayai. Okay, so that's the end of Oi's base of the beer, and we're gonna tomorrow's daf shir, we're gonna finish the beer with Ois Gimel, and then we'll be done. Looking forward. Take care.